thank you for the invite to be here. I have to say, the last two standing. Unfortunately, some of our peers couldn't make it, but we look forward to this discussion. Frank, you certainly don't need introduction, but I do want to ask you, as an opening, why you are passionate about this topic and why you chose to be part of this, what was panel, but now fireside chat, which focuses on the building blocks of Africa's digital economy.
Okay, thank you very much. When I look at Africa as a continent, one of the things I always say is we should not look at Africa as if it's a monolithic continent, right? Context is important. Each country has its own nuances, depending on, which market you want to go into, and you have to appreciate that fact. But also at the same time, I always say that until Africa starts courting the way men court before marriage, oh, you got that, right? Then we still have a long way to go. Remember, in a boxing match, in a ring, there is always a winner and a loser, but still, the winner still has some bruises. So we should never fear to face the challenges that come across to us, because for us to win sometimes, we have to have a bit of bruises. So for me, this topic, I'm very passionate about it because I want to see a connected Africa where people can move freely and connect freely at the same time.
Awesome, that's fantastic, and I love that analogy of the winning fighter still has bruises. So if we jump into the discussion, and I know we are between you and lunch, so let's keep it exciting. The first thing that I want to acknowledge is we know that Africa is the continent with the youngest median age of 19, and we also know that there's been massive growth in the adoption of mobile money, which tells me that there's certainly appetite towards embracing the digital economy. The biggest thing we need to focus on is building that trust factor. But before we get started in unpacking that, common language is the basis of progress. So how do you describe the digital economy? What does it look like? What are the imperatives of this digital economy? Because we don't want to be talking about a unicorn. We want it to be something that everyone can resonate to. So what does it look like to you?
So the perfect example I'd use on this platform is, if you look at Bianca and you look at me, Bianca has notes she's writing, I have notes on my phone. So that's analog economy, this is digital economy.
This is 10 years experience at 20, so it's certainly the wrong way.
So just coming back to context, digital economy is, if we move away from the usual textbook definition of, it's e-commerce, connectivity, everything online, and it's all about the consumer. Technology is not the future of payments. The consumer is the future of payments. Technology is just an enabler. So when you think of digital economy, you have a lot of players that come into that space. You have regulators, you have the banks in this room, you have the fintechs, you name it, you have the different regulators that come together. And this is whereby everything is happening online. In the analog time, what used to happen is banks and other service providers would dictate products and services for the consumers. In the digital economy, the narrative is different, because everything that is moving to that space, you have to work with the consumer on board. So in a simple way, if you think of digital economy, is whereby you want to bring everything together, you want to cross borders just beyond South Africa, so that you're able to connect every other person. But important, you have to think of the end consumer, which is a customer.
Absolutely. You mentioned the regulator, and I know it's Nedbank obviously being on a fast-tracked, exciting journey to cloud, and very proud of the progress we've made. One of the biggest factors in the success of that journey has been working with regulators, and especially if we look at multi-enablement into Africa, we see certain constraints around what we can and can't do with the adoption of cloud technologies. However, if we look at the fact that Africa really has the fintech footprint that it does, I have to ask you, what is the role of the regulator in making the digital economy real for us? Because they can be a barrier to entry, but we see some progressiveness happening.
Yeah, so let's first agree in this room, right? For the sake of this conversation, let's not call them regulators, let's call them collaborators. Okay? And I think as we move back to go maybe in your different, associations, or when you talk to the regulators, the first thing we need to change is the mindset of the regulator, because we use the name regulator. That means the guy's working with a stick and, if you fail to do something, we want to make them more collaborators. So for this context, let's call them collaborators, because if you're collaborating with me, then you have my interest at heart. And that means I don't have to come to you as a bank with a no objection policy document for you to approve something that I've seen ahead of time. I don't have to always knock to the regulator and say, I have this service or product I want to launch. And, but if they're collaborating with you, they'll walk with you that journey. They'll understand what exactly you want to launch and become with you. So number one is regulators should be collaborators more, so that people don't fear them much. Number two is they should always align with policymakers, researchers, so that it's easier when either certain regulations are going to be brought about. It's easier for the people in the space. And if you think of digital economy, so it is, there are so many facets, infrastructure, access, connectivity. But if regulator of the day does not really work with the players in that field, then it's going to be a challenge for you to achieve it, because digital economy has to be driven from that regulatory point top, so that it's easier for everyone. But also it's a conversation that starts again individual basis. You have to be the person to start it, talk about it, and build it forward. So to me, I think the regulator, who's a collaborator in this space, has to create safety net for everybody so that it's easier. We should not fear going to see them and talking to them. And that way it opens up, not only in South Africa, but also in the whole region in Africa.
Absolutely, and if I may add to that, I think often the regulator can be misunderstood. So I think often I look at the cloud journeys I've been part of, and each organization has nuanced interpretations of what the regulator's putting forward. And in fact, they want the progression, they want the digital enablement. And I mean, we see that in the Africa Union's digital transformation strategy for Africa. If you go and look through that document, the progressive mindset's there. And the acknowledgement that for the global achievement of the UN SDG, I always get that acronym, SDG goals to be achieved, really it comes down to technology. Else, as you mentioned, we're never going to achieve it. And so we have to also assess our interpretation of what the regulator's putting forward, I think.
Correct.
Frank, moving on to the next question, and I'm going to skip because I'm aware of time and I'm aware we've got grumbling tummies in the room, so including my 1.75. I'll move forward here. And I'm going to ask you possibly the last question, but I think the most important question that I can ask, and this is why I don't normally use papers because they get mixed up. Gentlemen own a stapler. So I'm not really analog, okay? I was agile. What are the main challenges and opportunities that Africa faces in developing its digital economy, and how has your organization and your partners tackled these, and what opportunities are you creating for people in the room to make this real?
Well, rephrase the question.
Okay.
It's always allowed, eh?
What are the main challenges and opportunities that Africa faces in developing its digital economy?
Okay.
And let me ask differently, what is our role as technology leaders in that?
Okay. So first, as technology leaders, I think what comes in mind very quickly is things around data privacy. Anybody who's providing, your technology service to anyone, I think you need to be aware that increasingly data privacy is something that is growing very fast. If some of you realize the other day, Facebook was fined some very, very good amount of $1 billion for just data transferring from EU to the US. It's an ongoing case. But the first thing as technology enablers and partners, we need to be very cautious about that. Because if you partner with a bank or any other player, these people entrust you with a lot of information. So you have to make sure that this is well kept. And you see, again, this is a reason why central banks come up with mandates like on soil. We don't want data to be stored on cloud sometimes, not realizing maybe cloud is agile, it's fast, and all these exciting things. So that's number one from a technology provider. But the other area, again, that we need to constantly sit back when we think of, how we build and grow technology is just sitting back and asking ourselves. And I like contextualizing all conversations that I have. Everybody who's seated in this room, what is your role? What role do you have to play in the digital economy sector? Sometimes we create it so much a big buzzword, but eventually you come and realize if you contextualize it to specific people, everybody here has a different understanding of the question you've asked. But if you start asking questions and if you start talking to each person on some of the ways they can manage and look at digital economy, you'll be surprised the wealth of responses you're going to get. So I still feel it calls upon all of us in this room, every other player outside there, to see how we can continue to have these conversations every day, to see how we can continue to collaborate, to co-create together. And I think the last point I wanted to add in the whole conversation is, guys, I don't know why we fear competition so much. Do you know, as a consumer, I'll not mention who my bank is, they might be in the room. But do you know...
Just say Nedbank.
So I said, do you know, my bank gets worried when they hear I'm talking to another bank. Guys, that's not your competition anymore. I have a phone, and your competition now, me as a consumer, is whoever is giving me that service now and fastest and at my own convenience. So what do you need to do? What we need to do is sit back and analyze, maybe as banks in the room, what areas can we compete? What areas can we collaborate? It's called co-opetition, right? And when you think of fraud, for example, in South Africa, which all these form, when you talk about digital economy, remember, guys, we're moving into a space where fraud is also following you in that space as you move. So as banks, try to identify what areas can you collaborate.
Absolutely.
Fraud is one of the areas you can collaborate. If I have an account with Standard Bank, Nedbank, Absa, Capitex, chances are my business account is in Standard Bank, my children's account is in Absa, so we are multi-banked. So if fraud is happening here, if I don't share with the other banks, your customer is going to share. So competition is no longer the other bank. Competition is the person who's giving me that service on my phone. And once we start that narrative from there, and as we talk about digital economy, we'll be able to mitigate a number of these things.
I couldn't agree more. It's no longer competitive advantage in the way the organization adopts the tech. We have to identify what our secret source is and exploit that. And ultimately, you don't want to be the MVP or best man on the losing team. And so as a continent, we need to collaborate to ensure we're not that losing team. And it's something I firmly believe in, and the adoption of the open source mindset. We actually need to operate as a community in this journey to cloud and partners like yourself. So, Frank, I'm going to close off with a little quote that I stole from your website, which I just thought was fantastic. If you go to the BPC, you'll see there's a quote there that says, "Digital is the fuel that empowers real life." And that makes it so real, because it actually, at the end of the day, eliminates technology and brings it back to the human and how we serve that human and empower them.
And it's what we say is, when I started, I think the other speaking slot is we transform traditional to digital, or Relive to digital at the same time. And then possibly my parting shot would be, guys, if there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can never harm us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy lunch.
On that note, co-opetition. Co-opetition. That's the takeaway. Another round of applause for our fire chat. Thank you.